Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. So some goings on today in the Gilgo Beach case. As promised in July, when the arrest of Rex Human occurred as the Gilgo Beach serial killer, we were promised on that date by District Attorney Ray Tierney that they had a fourth case impending that would be indicted in short order once they had the necessary DNA evidence, mitochondrial and nuclear DNA evidence that gave them enough evidence to present to the grand jury to get the fourth indictment of the Gilgo Beach Four, as they became known as, and of course put it on the screen. Maureen Brainyard-Barnes, the case was just added today, the indictment. Megan Waterman, Melissa Bartolome, and Amberlynn Costello. And we're going to bring you this case today because there are some new things going on. And we know this case has been an infamous case in the history of serial killers and also in the history of Suffolk County, Long Island. As so many twists and turns have occurred with this case, the case languished for 12 years with very little happening until the task force was formed. And then things started to happen, and we credit recently resigned Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison, of course, a former NYPD Chief of Department, Chief of Detectives, and of course give credit to District Attorney Ray Tierney and the task force that they started involving the Suffolk County detectives, the FBI, the state police, the Suffolk County jail personnel that have their own investigative unit, and of course, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office own investigators. So with a team like that, it's understandable now why they got such great results from this case. And we're going to do a dive into this today. We'll discuss the press conference, and we'll discuss all the things that occurred today that brought this case finally to the fourth indictment of the women known as the Gilgo Four, and added today was Maureen Brainard-Barnes. So guys, hold on to your seats, get ready. You're entering true crime from a police perspective, the off-the-cuff perspective. You're entering the police off-the-cuff zone. There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch Michael by there.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger. I got an exciting, not a big cast of characters, but at least two other cast of characters to join me today to bring you this show. And I'm going to first introduce to you retired NYPD detective and straight out of Brooklyn, New York, Detective Phil Grimaldi. Welcome to the show, Phil.
Thank you for having me, Billy.
Phil, it looks like you had your game face on. I don't want to be that serious. This is a serious matter, but you look really serious today.
All right, I'll loosen up.
All right, loosen up a little bit. And today we also have a criminologist, doctor of criminology from St. Thomas University in sunny Miami, a fan favorite. I complimented her. I told her how good she looks today. Welcome to the show, Dr. Debbie Goodman.
Hey,
Good
Doc.
afternoon.
Dr. Debbie, that's what I like. He came in nice and smiling. You know, Phil looked like he just had killed a few people, but, you know, he came in smiling. So, you know, this case is just, it's an amazing case, and it's taken so many twists and turns over the years, but good news today, some really good news. And I think the people that have been following this case, they want to hear the good news. And, you know, when you talk about the Gilgo Four, you know, there's really a total of 11 bodies in this case. And we'll find out down the road as we dig deeper and as the investigators dig deeper into this case, whether in fact they can charge any of these other cases. And of course, on the screen, the Gilgo 4, Maureen Brainard-Barnes, Megan Waterman, Melissa Bartolome, and Amberlynn Costello. According to the New York Times, in an article written today, when Rex Schumann was arrested and charged in July as the Gilgo Beach serial killer, prosecutors outlined a narrative against him that his defense lawyer, Michael Brown, attacked as cherry-picked and DNA evidence that Mr. Brown derided as shaky. Mr. Schumann, who is now 60 years old, had been charged with murdering 3 of the so-called Gilgo 4, who in 2010 were found bound with burlap, belts, and tape on the Long Island oceanfront. Prosecutors said they were awaiting the DNA testing they needed to charge him in the killing of the 4th woman, Maureen Brainard-Barnes, 25, when she was killed, of Norwich, Connecticut. But then those charges finally came on Tuesday, just over 6 months later. Prosecutors used the occasion to deliver their version of a knockout punch in the case. In addition to charging Mr. Schumann with second-degree murder in court, they filed an extensive outline of an updated, ratcheted-up case that seemed to stun the normally agile Mr. Brown, who is, of course, Mr. Schuman's attorney. After the hearing, he deflected questions regarding the new evidence, saying that it only had just been divulged to him. He said that his client had maintained his innocence from day one, and that he was looking forward to fighting these charges. That fight may have just gotten more difficult. Previously, Mr. Brown had cited weaknesses in the mitochondrial DNA testing method used by investigators to connect stray hairs found on the victims with Mr. Schumann and his family. Tremendous news. But Dr. Debbie, let me go to you first. What does this do to the case for the defense?
Well, first, good evening, Sergeant Bill, Detective Phil, the audience members. Always a pleasure to join. I think this is very telling, and once again, it's going to solidify more of this individual's involvement. You know, when we talk about serial killers, mass murderers, remember, these people become obsessed about everything involving a case from A to Z, before they commit the crime, during the crime, and the aftermath. So now that we have identified, aligned, and connected this suspect with our victim number 4, Miss Brainard-Barnes, it's really going to be an uphill climb, I believe, for this defense. We've got the mitochondrial DNA. We've got nuclear DNA. We've got so much that will be revealed through the searches, 200 searches plus that he has made on the case itself. Why? Because these killers want to know, where is law enforcement in the process and in the journey? Is the killer one step ahead, or is law enforcement closing in? So I think really identifying key, solid, validated evidence is just going to be, I know we can't quite say the slam dunk. We don't want to use that terminology, but it's looking close. I don't think the question anymore is, did Rex Schumann participate in these 4 murders? Rather, how could it not be him?
Very good, Dr. Debbie. Detective Phil.
Yes, sir.
Hard to follow that, but I think I have confidence that you can. With this case now, this certainly gives a hell of a lot more work for the defense to try to create any kind of doubt with this evidence. This is science. This is scientific evidence. Phil.
Billy, I think what you just said really showed today in the press conference when the attorney, Mike Brown, who I thought came across to me as very strong, very professional, very confident in his defense of Rex Schumann. However, today he kind of got a little bit taken by surprise by the new evidence. I think that he tried to describe Rex Schumann as a person who was living work, church, and home type of life. As we know that that's not the case based on all of the evidence that I see here. I am firmly convinced that he's responsible for at least these 4 murders. And I think that some of the new stuff that came out today is even more powerful. The fact that he did the searches, as Dr. Debbie was mentioning, but he also searched equipment to wipe his computer and his phone, to erase any searches previously that I'd done. And I believe he was in possession of that equipment. Before we went on the air, I talked about how Mike Yerry always talks about consciousness of guilt. He was consciously looking for equipment to perhaps erase whatever searches he did on his computer and cell phone and laptop, things of that nature. So those are some strong things that I think the defense has to get over. This case is probably very solid at this point. And as Dr. Debbie alluded to, we never use the term a slam dunk case. There's no such thing, because you never know what those 12 people and the 2 alternates are going to do in a jury room, or what conclusion they're going to come to. So a good defense attorney makes an argument. He tries to create doubt. And if that doubt is created in the minds of the jurors, you could wind up with an acquittal. I don't see that in this case, but as I said, the way the criminal justice system is in this country, you never know.
Phil, I always use the term, and if Professor Geary, who's not on the show tonight, he started college tonight as a teaching. He's a professor. Tonight was his first class at 5 o'clock. He's not a student. He's a professor.
We're all students.
We're all students.
We learn something every day, especially on this show. It's
That's
true.
right.
It's true.
He uses the term consciousness of guilt, and I'm guilty for my own canonisms, which I always say good investigation is equal parts art and equal parts science. And when they come together, it brings a powerful weapon against the accused. And when you have good investigators that know how to talk to people, solicit information, gather information, and draw conclusions as a group, not as individuals. Detectives need to be a team. As we saw when they put together a task force, things started to happen. When people work as, we used to call them secret squirrels, when the secret squirrels would keep things to themselves and not share it, that's when you had problems. But once they put this task force together, things started to happen. I want to play a little bit of Ray Tierney and the press conference today.
There'd be no mistake. The work of the grand jury is continuing. Now
it's a little low, Bill.
We've talked about the transition from the grand jury to the prosecution. Well, with regard to those other bodies and those other murders, the grand jury, the task force will continue to investigate those cases. They'll be investigated through the grand jury, and when it is appropriate, and if we have anything to say, we will say it at that time. But we're going to let that investigation play out. Before I turn it over for questions, I'll just talk about the bail letter. The bail letter discloses some further information on the case. Obviously, it's not all of the evidence in the case, but it does disclose some. So I'll synopsize that and open it up for questions at the end. With regard to the first part of the bail letter, it indicates that the task force has established that the defendant's family was out of state during Maureen Brainard-Barnes' murder, just as they were out of state during the murder of the other 3 victims. The family had checked into a hotel in Atlantic City in July 6th of 2007, and they remained there till approximately July 20th of 2007. And both the documentary evidence as well as witness statements have indicated that during the time of Maureen Brainard-Barnes' disappearance in on or about July 9th of 2007, Yerman was not with his family. He joined them sometime thereafter. We also recovered 2 burner phones from the defendant at the time of his arrest. The phone ending in 1697 was recovered from his office, and the phone 2671 was recovered from his person. With regard to the phone ending in 1697, again, we see the same repetitive activity on that phone. It was used to contact numerous sex workers. We also were able to use it to identify an alias, Andrew Roberts, which was a known alias being used by the defendant. We were also able to recover a fraudulent email account, which is sandbagger303@gmail.com. The Sandbagger email address was used similar to the T-Hawk fraudulent account. The T-Hawk was used after Sandbagger, but the Sandbagger account was used once again to search for torture porn and info on the Gilgo case, on the Gilgo investigation, and victims' families. the defendant was particularly interested in the cellular telephone technology being not only used by the FBI, but specifically by the FBI in this case. We also recovered numerous electronic devices from the defendant, including a number of laptops, smartphones, tablets. From that, we learned that the defendant undertook numerous searches for software that could assist in erasing or wiping data from computer and digital devices such as Easy Hide IP and Shredder X. He used those two applications to destroy evidence in this case. We see that he continued to make prostitution-related searches before, during, and after the disappearance and murder of the 4 victims in this case. Notably, on one laptop that was recovered from the house, there was an attempt to shred evidence shortly before the defendant met with and murdered Melissa Barthelemy. Another laptop recovered in the house accessed Amber Costello's Backpage ad on September 1st, 2010 at approximately 9:03 p.m. And that is just hours before the ruse occurred around midnight on September 2nd. So the way the timeline works is on 9:03, that laptop that was recovered from the defendant's house was used to access Amber Costello's Backpage ad. Thereafter, at about 11:33, the burner phone that was used to kill Amber Costello contacted Amber Costello's phone from Massapequa Park, and later at 12:05, that same phone accessed that Amber Costello's phone, but this time the phone had moved from the Massapequa Park area to the West Babylon area where Amber Costello lived, and then back to Massapequa Park. So that is significant evidence as well. I think the biggest change is the DNA evidence, and we've received significant DNA evidence between the time of the first arraignment and this time.
You know, although this is the hardest thing, I think, for anyone to understand, I think it's the most important thing to understand right now, because the first part of this, when he's talking about the cell phone technology, the burner phones, the computer, the digital evidence, that's more of the art, a little mixture of the art and the science of investigation. However, what he's going to talk about right now is the science of investigation. And not only does this bring in the collection of evidence and the preservation of evidence, but it brings in the Suffolk County Police Lab, probably as well as the FBI lab. And they don't want to name this lab, but I'm pretty sure it's the Othram lab in Texas that I believe did the DNA evidence on the Brian Koberger case. And they are a tremendous lab, one of the top lab, and he's not going to mention them because I don't think they want the press to reach out to these private labs. So that's why they're not naming them. But the work that's going on, and I think that's why the attorney for Rex Human, Michael Brown, if he had hair, he would have been pulling it out, is because the technology has just grown by leaps and bounds. And he's like, even in the last year, he was not ready for this. And guess what? He better start getting ready.
Which I'll synopsize for you at this time. We've always spoken, right from the very beginning, we spoke about the 5 hairs of significance that were recovered from 3 of the 4 burial sites of the women. So I'll just go through that. We earlier reported on mitochondrial DNA evidence as to 3 of those hairs. We now have nuclear DNA results for all 5 of the hairs. So I'll go through it. The first, the most significant hair for the purposes of the superseding indictment was the hair that was found on Brainard Barnes. It was found on the buckle of the belt that secured her lower body, and we also found three hairs at the site of Megan Waterman's burial. We found 2 female hairs and 1 male hair. The male hair was found at the bottom of the burlap that Megan Waterman was wrapped in, and the 2 female hairs were found around the head area, 1 at the top of the burlap and 1 near the tape that was used to restrain Megan Waterman's head. The 5th hair was a female hair that was found in the area of Amber Costello's head. Now, at the time of the original arraignment, we reported on mitochondrial DNA results for 3 of those hairs. With regard to the Megan Waterman hair that was found outside the head area, it was consistent with the genetic profile of both Asa, the mitochondrial DNA profile of both Asa and Victoria Huerman, and you could exclude the rest of the population to 99.69% of the rest of the population. With regard to the one male hair of significance that was found on the burlap with Megan Waterman, again, that genetic result was consistent with the defendants, and 99.96% of the population could be excluded. And then finally, we had the mitochondrial results with regard to the female hair found at the Costello burial site, and that was consistent with the genetic profiles of both Asa and Victoria Huerman, and that was to an exclusion of 99.98% of the rest of the population. And if you remember the science of mitochondrial DNA, unlike nuclear DNA, you inherit that solely from your mother. So a mother and a child will have identical mitochondrial DNA profiles. So that is the mitochondrial results. We now have nuclear DNA profiles on all 5 of the questioned hairs, and we use this using the SNP or SNP process. And with regard to the hair found on Maureen Brainard-Barnes on that belt buckle, it was 7.9 trillion times more likely to have come from someone with the identical genetic profile as Asa Ellerup. With regard to the first hair that we got the mitochondrial DNA profile on, the female hair on Megan Waterman, that is 2.374 times 10 to the 48th power as likely to have come from someone matching the genetic profile of Asa Ellerup. And the way that number is expressed, that's scientific expression, I'm told. So that's basically 2.374, and you add 48 zeros to that. So that's a number so large it doesn't even exist. A name for it doesn't even exist. With regard to the second hair that was found on the tape by the head of Megan Waterman, that was also consistent with a person with the same genetic profile as Asa Ellerup, and that was 2.778 times 10 to the 488th power could exclude the rest of the population. With regard to the male hair, that was we received the mitochondrial DNA profile with regard to that. The nuclear DNA profile on that was 1.48 times 10 to the 169th power as to come from someone sharing the same genetic profile as the defendant. And finally, with regard to Amber Costello, we received the nuclear DNA profile on that, and that was 4.654 times 10 to the 63rd power, as likely to have come from someone with the same genetic profile as his daughter, Victoria Huerman. So again, the mitochondrial DNA for mother and daughter are going to be the same. Nuclear are going to be separate. Everyone has a separate nuclear DNA profile except for identical twins.
So I know this was a little tough to get through, but I think it's really, really important. Dr. Debbie, how will a defense attorney argue this? How is Michael Brown, who we saw in a press conference, I could show a little bit of his press conference later, was pretty flustered. Wait, all of a sudden it was mitochondrial. Now it's nuclear. Oh, now what is he? Very strong evidence. And again, the science is what we have to be like, oh my God. And I'm reading some of the chat and people are saying, does that mean that Asa Ellerup and Victoria Huerman are involved in this? And no.
I knew that was coming.
No, it is not. Dr. Debbie, would you explain?
Yes, indeed, and certainly appreciate the viewers' insight, analysis, and commentary. So the only thing that I could think of from a possible logical, reasonable standpoint that the defense might raise would be that of transference. We've talked about it before. The analogy might be with the pet and the pet owner. So for those viewers who own pets, the cat, the dog, if the animal is seated on the couch for a period of time, the likelihood is there's going to be shedding of the hair, the fur. Now, the pet owner comes along, sits down. What's the likelihood of transference of that fur and hair to the individual? High probability. But now, listening to all that we've heard, and the three of us certainly know, and our viewers are extremely astute and adept on these matters, science just does not lie. DNA doesn't lie. We refer to it as the silent witness. It says nothing, yet it speaks volumes. So just hearing the mathematics and the percentiles and percentages here, I don't know about everybody else, but maybe I got as high as calculus in high school. But where did we ever hear of these numerics with 48 zeros? It's just astonishing. And therefore, I think once again, when jury members hear this and they're smart and they want to focus and they want to understand, this is once again pointing to the higher likelihood and probability of guilt. And the defense is going to come up with something and say, no, the mother's not involved, the wife's not involved, the daughter's not involved, and neither is my client.
You know, Dr. Debbie and Phil, I'm going to direct this question to you. Very impressive how they were able to keep this evidence, secure it, and have it secured and in a place where it would not degrade, so that 12 to 14 years later, it's processed using this new technology, SNP. Single nucleotide polymorphism. My God, I studied for
I don't know
years
how you
to learn
remember
that.
that.
You know, Phil, I'm going to give you an honorary Brooklyn PhD today because
Okay.
you're going to explain that.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to explain that, but I'm going to say
Well, not
this.
DSNP. Just explain the preservation of the evidence, the collection of the evidence.
Yes. I want to just make a point. I want to piggyback what Dr. Debbie just said. It's normal to shed between 50 and 100 hairs a day. So if you go through life and you're healthy, normal, you're going to shed 50 to 100 hairs a day. So if you're living in a home, every day, 50 to 100 hairs are going to come off your body. Some of them may wind up in your home. Some of them may wind up outside. But if we start with the conspiracy theories about that the daughter's involved, that's going to just take us into the weeds. I think it's very likely that what Dr. Debbie talked about, it was an exchange. The hairs were an exchange onto the items that they found the hairs on. Now, with regard to the evidence, when we recover evidence, it's always handled in a very, very professional manner. Certain pieces of evidence are kept inside of a paper bag as to let it breathe, so it'll remain intact. And other evidence is then placed in plastic bags or some type of a container that will keep anything from the outside out. So the evidence obviously was maintained over the course of time from when these bodies were recovered until, as Bill just noted, when they were able to get a suspect and try and get some type of a DNA to compare it to. And then the SNP technology was used to come up with that nuclear that we just heard in the press conference.
So single nucleotide polymorphism. I stayed up all night.
Say that 5 times quick, Billy.
I stayed up all night memorizing that.
Listen, this part of the evidence, when it comes to the jury and it comes to the trial, I am sure that they're going to have an expert that's going to explain it in layman's terms. It's going to be, listen, I've been in court where there are juries, and believe me, they pay attention. The way that the courtroom is set up, they're facing the witness, they're right there, and they're going to be tasked with perhaps a death penalty case. So even if it's not a death penalty case, this is a serial killer that took at least 4 lives and perhaps as many as 11. And I think they're going to take it seriously. So once they explain it, the real layman's term about how DNA works, I think they'll get that. And then what I just talked about, how, well, they're going to be the question, how did these hairs of these other people who aren't charged in the case get into the evidence? But we're going to explain, and they'll be able to explain that the normal human being loses 50 to 100 hairs a day.
Absolutely. And, you know, one of the things people want to also know here is that what created the Gilgo 4? Why were these 4 distinguished from the other 7 in this case? And one of the things, of course, is that they were all found in basically the same area of Gilgo Beach. And I'm just going to read something from, and I'll put it on the screen actually. If you're a real follower of this case, you should absolutely have this this document and have it put on your computer so that you can see it. The disappearance of Maureen Brainard-Barnes. Maureen Brainard-Barnes was last seen on July 9th, 2007 in New York City. At that time, she was believed to be working as a sex worker. On July 6, 2007, Miss Brainard-Barnes' cell phone was contacted by a burner cell phone. Didn't we just hear about that? They have that number. They have the last 4 digits that they called out. We talk about the science and the art of investigation, both here, both, because anyone that's ever done any cell phone work in an investigation knows how painstaking it is. It doesn't just pop out at you. It's something that you have to really search for. On July 6, 2007, Ms. Brainard-Barnes' cell phone was contacted by the burner cell phone. Between July 6, 2007 and July 9, 2000, there were 16 interactions between this burner phone and Brainard-Barnes' cell phone. On July 9, 2007, the last cell site location for the Brainard-Barnes cell phone was at approximately 1156 in Midtown Manhattan near the 59th Street Bridge. Thereafter, the Brainard-Barnes cell phone had no further activity until July 12, 2007. On July 12, 2007, 3 days after her disappearance, 2 outbound calls were made for Brainard-Barnes' cell phone, checking her voicemail from a cell site location near the Long Island Expressway in Icelandia. So connecting the scientific evidence with the artistic evidence and connecting the dots, as I love to say in all investigations, is so damn important. And the fact that Rex Uelman, and I'm going to steal Professor Mike Geary's expression again, consciousness of guilt, he's trying to cover his tracks before he's even caught. Dr. Debbie.
Yes, indeed, Sergeant Bill, Detective Phil. So interestingly, I 100% agree with you with the connecting the dots, and I tend to use that phrase as well in discussions with my college students as we navigate through a lot of these high-profile cases. But if I may, I'm just going to add to your C and bring in 2 more. So connecting the dots, but also what I think is very important is the consistency and continuity once the investigators, the experts, start looking at behaviors and patterns of these people. So, for example, he's already demonstrating the consistency, right? He's using these burner phones. He's reaching out. We have phone numbers. There is an audience, let's call it, of his victimology. He has been consistent with whom he is targeting. So I think all of that is another building point. So we're connecting the dots. We're seeing the consistency. And then one more area, which would be the control. He's always going to be, or wants to be, as many of these killers are, no matter which case we're analyzing, with the serial killers, with the mass murderers, they are really all about control. They're controlling everything, A to Z, deciding on their plan. They're planning the crime. They're finishing the crime, but all of this becomes obsessive compulsive with them, even though seemingly they may be able to interact with friends if they have friends, with family members, go to work, but it's like this constant train running through their minds, thinking about it all, before, during, and after. The before, of course, is how are they carrying out this plan? As we all know, the 5 W's and the H, who, what, when, where, why, and how has to be mapped out first. Then they're in the, the participation of the crime. And remember, their control gets built up. Why? Because they seemingly think they've gotten away with 1. Okay, we got away with 1. Let's try 2. Let's try 7. They continue to do this because they think they are smarter than all of us in the field until, guess what? They get caught.
Dr. Debbie, that was brilliant.
It really was.
Nicely done, which leads me right into something else, which leads me into, and you touched upon it without actually saying it, is MO, or modus operandi, the method of operation by Rex Uelman. And Phil, I'm going to throw this to you because I know you're salivating over taking this question.
Go ahead.
Talk to us about Rex Human's modus operandi?
Well, his modus operandi, the profile of a serial killer is exactly what Dr. Debbie noted. He wants control. This is about control. It's not so much about the sex with serial killers. It's more about the control. Now, when you think about the fact that he taunted some of the family members, this is where he became excited. This is where he gained control. He was able to taunt them. Now he checked her cell phone messages to see. Now, the cell phone hadn't been used for a period of about 2 days, but he was checking her messages to see if there was someone looking for her. Where are you? We haven't heard from you. Are you okay? Again, this is one of the other components of a serial killer that he's going to enjoy this. He's going to relive it. It's going to give him some type of, I know it's sick, but it's satisfaction for him that he knows where this person is, but they don't. So it gives him some type of satisfaction, as sick as it sounds. This is why this individual could never be set loose on society. This is a really sick individual. And obviously, when you do the things that he did, and we believe he did do these things, there's only one place for this person, and that's incarcerated.
You know, Phil, I think you were on the show with me a couple of months ago with Dr. Joni Johnston,
Yes.
a PhD who's an expert on serial killers. And she said Rex Human is a psychosexual sadistic killer.
Yes.
And where he gets his jollies or his joy or whatever, his thrills from and it can be either physical pain or psychological pain, because after these victims were dead, he was inflicting psychological pain on their families by using their cell phones to call their families to taunt them. That is sick. That's the
satisfaction. That's the satisfaction part for him. I know it sounds insane. It's sick, but this is what the profile, what we've learned from studying serial killers over the many years. This is what this is how they're satisfied. It's not real. There's a sexual component to it. Yes, 100%. But that's not what's driving them. The driving is the control, the satisfaction of the torture. So I think that I'm glad you brought that up, Billy, because I do remember that show. And that was a tremendous point that was brought out about the profile of serial killers.
You know, I would also bet, and Dr. Debbie, I know through your studies, you probably know this too. I would bet that Rex Human went back to the dump site numerous times before these bodies were ever recovered. And that is also a common thing that serial killers will do to relive the feeling, to relive the experience. Your thoughts, Dr. Debbie?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. So I really want to also comment what the two of you just said, being sick, but also being satisfied. But I think it's important. We did have a preliminary conversation in the studio waiting room before we joined the guests, and the three of us were talking about insanity. Now, I would like to share my opinion on that. I absolutely do not think this individual is insane. Why? Because informally, we may use, the person's sick, the person's crazy, but legally, to be insane, as we know, and we remind the viewers, that means the individual does not know what he or she is doing. The individual does not know what he or she is doing is wrong. I do not think those elements at all apply here. I think he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew what he was doing is wrong. Why? Because he also went to great lengths to try to erase a lot of the data analytics here and the evidence. So back to the revisit. Absolutely, he did. Why? Because we'll just remind of three more terms that I think describe him and describe serial murderers as a whole. And that would be they're narcissistic. It's all about them. And again, what Detective Phil said about the satisfaction, both satisfaction and being sick. Yes, but they continue to do it. Why? Because the reliving of all of this is what they want. And that's part of their control. They want to go back, sensory issues. They want to see, they want to smell, they want to touch. It's the whole, area there of the senses. Then I think secondarily, they're grandiose. So once again, these killers do plan their work, if you will, and they work through the plan thinking nobody's catching them, nobody's as smart as they are, they've got it all under control. And then lastly, what Detective Phil said, which I agree with, that's the pleasure part. We call it hedonistic. This is a hedonistic killer. He derived pleasure from it all, A to Z. He's still deriving pleasure. Why? Because we know his name. He's on TV. He's in the media. Do you all remember back in July when he was getting booked and the fingerprinting and the whole intake process? he said to one of the corrections officers, gee, are people talking about this case? Is it on the news? Do they know my name?
Mhm.
And the female officer, he said, yes, they sure do. And he likes that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Guys, I'm going to do a quick commercial. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and ring that bell. Share us with your friends and your family. And we also have a Patreon with 3 different levels if you want to contribute financially. We have a YouTube channel membership with, count 'em, 5 different levels. We try to give the police perspective. In the case of Phil Grimaldi and myself, real true NYPD investigators who really walk the walk, and we hope we can talk the talk. I think we can talk the talk, but we walk the walk. We did these investigations across the city for many, many, many years, thousands of cases. So this is the real place to get true crime. And I think we got a good handle on this. We bring you great guests like Dr. Debbie Goodman and, of course, Phil Grimaldi. And this is an amazing case. And I don't want to go into all the aspects, Kenny, because there's so much with this new evidence. I want to play a little bit of this here to give another.
Learning new details in the Gilgo Beach murders. Suspected Long Island.
I have no problem all of a sudden.
Billy, can I piggyback something that Dr.
Go
Debbie
ahead.
said?
Go ahead.
You know, Doc, you talked about the control and the satisfaction. Just think about this for a second. He had the cell phone of the victim. Now he controls that phone. That's another component of it. He made calls to the voicemail. And we talk about with serial killers, trophies and souvenirs. He took that cell phone. That became something for him to relive the excitement of what he did to this young lady. So with all of that said, I think once that comes out at the trial and you have a professional like Dr. Debbie that talks about a serial killer and the profile of a serial killer, and you understand what may have been going through this individual's mind, and you have the evidence, there's no doubt the connection has been made. He had burner phones in his control, and the victim's phone was used, and if we believe he's the one that had it, then he did these things. So all of that said, I think it's going to be a very powerful trial to get justice for these victims.
100%. And I think, and we'll get into this a little bit more after I play this, is that they haven't even discussed potential souvenirs and trophies that they recovered as a result of the search warrants at his office, at his home, and at his storage facility. There was another home down south. God knows what else they have. I mean, you want to see Mike Brown's head spin around like in The Exorcist? Present all of this other evidence that they have yet to disclose it. Well, he probably has it, but the public doesn't know about it yet from discovery. There's got to be souvenirs. There's got to be other things that they recovered in one of those 4 crime scenes.
And serial killer Rex Heuermann has pleaded not guilty to a new second-degree murder charge. This comes after a grand jury formally indicted Heuermann in the death of a 4th woman in New York.
This is not doing great today. So we know he was today. They presented it. He pled not guilty again. There is so much evidence in this case. Again, when we mention the souvenirs, the trophies that they haven't yet even presented, and when we always get back to it, one of the things that was and is a huge piece of evidence is the well, that's the home. That's where they did the search warrant. But is that vehicle right there? The green Chevrolet Avalanche that came up in the investigation 12, 14 years ago, and they were not able to discover who owned it or the vehicle because of an incorrect lawman search, which anyone in law enforcement knows what that is. It was as simple as putting it in as a car rather than a truck, or as a truck rather than a car, whichever.
SUV, yeah, it was
right, whichever the mistake was. And when they founded the task force, a female investigator from the state police ran it correctly, and it came back to a man named Rex Heuermann in Massapequa Park, who they also had evidence from the Costello case that a man fitting the description of a 6'6"
Ogre.
280 to 300-pound ogre with this green avalanche, that evidence was in the case folder, lying dormant for years. And then they actually pulled this photo up on Google Earth. Just baffling. Some of the things they missed in this case. I mean, it's easy for us to sit back right now and critique and criticize, but Phil, it seems like it was overlooked.
Definitely overlooked, Billy. And when you look at that vehicle, think about it. The location where the bodies were found, high weeds, perhaps to secrete the bodies into that area. He could have drove in there. That's a four-wheel drive. It's a high vehicle. It wouldn't get stuck very easily. So I think that was another component of the stuff that this Rex Human was doing. So they did miss it. However, sometimes when you do computer searches, Billy, I've done some lawman searches in my time on the job. If you don't have an exact thing, there's a code for a Suburban or a sport utility vehicle. If you just put it in as a four-door car or something of that nature, it really might not show the information. However, I believe the state police investigator that did get it right, she knew how to put it in as an SUV or whatever the exact code was. They were able to come up with it. And then when you look at that Google Earth photo, there it is right in front of his house. I mean, very, very powerful.
And it's, as a law enforcement personnel, former law enforcement personnel myself, it pains me to have broadcasters rip law enforcement apart because of this oversight, but they're correct to do so. It was in plain sight. It wasn't hiding. It was in plain sight. There's the house. There's that beautiful house of the architect on I say that facetiously. There's the worst house on the block that belonged to an architect. And, now, of course, after it, everyone says that was the house of a serial killer. It's easy to say that now. But really, when you think he's an architect and this is the house that he lives in, it's baffling. And apparently the house, not that this means a great deal, but when you look upon the personality of Rex Human, the house was a literal hoarder's paradise. I spoke to some police personnel that were in that house. It was apparently a disaster.
Billy, don't hold back. It was described as a shithole. I hate to use
Yes,
that terminology,
yeah,
but that's
well,
how it was described.
I wanted to calm down a little bit today, give you the good Bill rather than bad Bill, and although you get both. They couldn't even, from what I understood, the investigators couldn't stay in the house for more than like 20 minutes
From the
because
owner.
it was so disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
And they felt like there was things crawling on them. And then when you hear the attorney saying, the police destroyed this house, I'm like, the house was already destroyed. You can see from the outside that whoever owns that house has no respect for his house,
Dr. Debbie, I got a question for you because when I was on the job in Coney Island in 60 Squad, my partner arrested a serial killer, Joel Rifkin. There were two of the murders that he did about 16, I believe. Two of the bodies wound up in Coney Island. My partner arrested him, and he had a very, very distinct body odor. Like he didn't wash. He was very, very dirty. Is that one of the profiles of serial killers that they don't partake in oral in hygiene? Are they generally like messy and dirty? Is that one of the profiles?
It is actually, and thank you for that. Even just listening to both of you and about this hoarding aspect. Remember, when we look at the psychology of these individuals, that too is about control. They're controlling the show here. To bathe, to not bathe, to select victims, how they're going to live. But a lot of these patterns of behaviors are obsessive compulsive. And so the question there becomes, again, are they controlling their own decision-making about how they live, where they live? Yes. It's not like they don't see it and they don't know about, unfavorable body odors. Of course, that's a sensory issue that they know as well. But why? Because they're disconnected. They're focused so much on the crimes, the killings. I'll do what I want, how I want. And the households, too, can very often be in disarray. It's usually not the norm to go the other way, meaning to be so fastidious and meticulous and clean. That's a rarity.
Dr. Debbie, sometimes, according to the crime that a criminal commits, like as you said, sometimes people are obsessively clean. And I found that with con men. They were
Yes.
obsessed with being organized and clean, and they kept everything in a proper state. They folded everything. And I was like, that has something to do with the part of their brain that is having them choose this particular crime. And the same can be said with a serial killer, like Phil described, someone that doesn't take care of himself. He's disgusting, body odor. In this case with Rex Human, his house, he's an architect. And this house would be the last house you would think, oh, an architect owns this house. Oh, really? It looks like a high wind would blow that house over, you know?
Sure. And the dirtiness of the home and the hoarding, yet he himself is the architect. So it truly is like this oxymoron of what they present themselves to be. I mean, when we hear about an architect, are we aligning architect with serial killer? I don't think so. I think that's very much on, the end of the spectrum here. We're thinking about different typologies of who these people would be. But once again, I feel very strongly they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing is wrong. They've made a decision. There could be just complete hatred toward their victims and the type of person that those people represent, and they want to, in their minds, eradicate them.
100%. Let me see if I can play a little.
Interested in inflicting pain and getting off on that. He's going to need to take them somewhere where they're not going to be hurt as much, where he has complete control over them, where he's not going to have to worry about somebody stumbling by or seeing car lights all of a sudden in the middle of his fantasy or whatever. And so I would be very surprised if he didn't take them to his house. I would imagine he took them somewhere inside where he could take his time and do whatever he wanted to do with them.
Wow. Pretty amazing. I didn't know I was going to be able to find.
You did a good job, Billy.
From his house. They say he could look across the bay. I don't know. I haven't been to that area of First Avenue in Massapequa Park, but I know where it is. I grew up in Levittown, Long Island, which is only 15 minutes from Massapequa. So that was Dr. Joni Johnston on the show. I think it was at least 6 months ago, and describing where Rex Human would take his victim. She would have been surprised for some reason, personality-wise, if he took them to his home, that rather maybe he killed them in the vehicle or at some other location, but to take them home. Because, look, a lot of what we're hearing now, too, especially we have it from attorney John Ray, who represented the family for Shannon Gilbert. I'm not going to, everyone says, stop picking. I'm not going to pick on John Ray. I'm just saying he came up recently with some information in regards to a witness from 27 years ago that involved Karen Vergata. And this witness signed an affidavit, which everyone was thinking, oh, it's an affidavit, it's true. Doesn't mean it's true. It means that the person signing it says it's true.
They believe it to be true.
There's a big difference in that it being true. Anyway, it threw a lot of, it's like when you throw stuff at a wall, certain stuff sticks. But when it first came out, and because he had police commissioner at the time, Rodney Harrison, standing next to him, people took great umbrage in that. This is true. This is true because Rodney Harrison is standing next to him. And the media went at it like it was a fresh piece of meat, that this is totally, and I tell you the truth, I don't think it was true. At this point, I mean, we said it day one that we didn't think it was credible. And now you don't hear about it anymore. And that's one of the problems with this case, too, because this case, because of the nature of the victims, that they were escorts. And very well early on in this investigation, the Suffolk County detectives may not have given it the attention it deserved because of that fact. And I'm not going to deny that. They may have. But they are focused now. They are laser focused now. They have an outstanding case against Rex Human on the Gilgo 4. Let's get him convicted of those 4 murders. He will never, ever see the light of day. And guess what will probably happen after that? He's going to face, 300 years in prison. He's 60 years old, whatever. Basically more than 3 lifetimes, right? 4 lifetimes that he'll be facing. Maybe at that point, he'll cooperate, because even his attorney may say, well, you want to help the police for more privileges while you're in prison? That's the only thing you've got to trade, because you're never going to be free. So there's the potential that he may, let me remove Dr. Debbie and I'll add her back. Phil, there's the potential that he may tell the truth and they may find out who some additional victims are.
Listen, that would be something that would make this case, we'd be whole with the case. If he did cooperate, that would be something very substantial. And I think that, like you said, Billy, if he's facing, all this time in jail, don't forget, as Dr. Debbie said, I know she's not on the screen right now. I wish she was here to comment about it, but he's going to relive it at the trial. He's going to enjoy every minute of the trial. And it's unfortunate that family members may testify and he's going to get off on that. And when he hears the evidence and all the things he's going to been accused of, he's going to get off on that. So once he's convicted, if he is in fact convicted and he's facing all this time, he's going to want to talk about it again with investigators. Perhaps he will at that point agree to cooperate and give information. And when he talks about it, he's reliving it. We know that from where he lives, he possibly could see the general area where these victims' bodies were found off in the distance. So maybe when he got up in the morning and he looked out the kitchen window and was sipping his coffee, he was reliving it again. All part of the components and the profile of a serial killer. I think that this is, Bill, you brought it up earlier. You talked about how they returned to the scene. Brian Kohlberger, we know that he went back to the scene, even though he's not really a serial killer per se.
He's a mass killer. He's a mass killer.
Yeah, he's a mass killer. But had he gotten away with this, would he have killed again? I think there was a great chance that he would have. But the point I'm trying to make is he returned to the scene. That's something that we do see in these serial killer cases. They want to see what they did. They want to see the excitement, almost like when an arsonist starts a fire and then either calls the fire department or stands there as the fire department responds and puts out the fire. Did we lose Dr. Debbie, Bill?
She's trying to come back on. She lost her internet connection. If I see her on back, I'll bring her back in.
I had a question for her too, but okay, go ahead.
Well, we can't ask her a blank screen.
No.
Phil, this is Geraldine Hart, all right? She was the police commissioner right before Rodney Harrison.
Right.
She's a former FBI agent. She's an attorney. But she did something that was very smart during her tenure. And one of the problems, of course, with the investigation was that there was too much secrecy. And we can get into I'm not going to get into the corruption with Chief Burke and all that other stuff. That's water under the bridge right now. There's nothing we can do about it. But that, of course, did hurt the case. But they were not using the press to help in this investigation. And they really needed to do so. And right here was a belt that was recovered. And they believed that this belt, they believed the initials were WM, WH, William Uhrman. And it could have been Rex Uhrman's father. That belt was found wrapped around the head of Maureen Brainard-Barnes. And there were hairs of Essa Ellerup around that belt. Tremendous forensic evidence, right? Tremendous evidence that, and the question is, why did they wait all those years to release that? Again, right there, could there be a potential that someone would have recognized that belt or could have I've seen that belt on Rex or I've seen it, but yet they didn't disclose it. And there it is again right there. And sure enough, we talk about the art and science of investigation. It contained hairs on it belonging to Essa Ellerup. So just brilliant work. But yet all of those years, that was sitting dormant in some evidence locker, and they never enlisted the press to put it out there till very late in Geraldine Hart's tenure as the Suffolk County Police Commissioner. Phil.
Bill, you made a great point. A lot of times in investigations, we want to utilize the media to help us put pictures of a perpetrator, video, different things of that nature to try and help us to get tips to make an arrest or to find out who the suspect is or the perpetrator in a case. You also want to sometimes shut the press out. You don't want too much information out there, depending on how the case is going. But that belt, I think it should have been put out much earlier than it was. There was probably a little bit of a cloud of secrecy among the case. They didn't want media attention. They didn't want, the bottom line is that between the district attorney at the time and Chief Burke, they didn't want any attention in their backyard at that time. So that's probably why it wasn't put out. Just think about the fact, if Rex Uhrman's father's name is William Uhrman, And that belt says WH on it. That's pretty powerful to me. And then you have the hairs obviously attached to it. Very, very powerful stuff. I would also like to see when this particular piece of evidence, the belt, was put out into the media, what did Rex Human do? Were there any searches on his computer? That had to raise him up if he saw that. That had to make some kind of an impact on his thinking. Did he become, concerned about that? Did he now change, direction and try to get that information from the internet to buy those apparatus to wipe his computer clean? That's another thing. If there's something that correlates from let's say the date and time that it was put out in the media, did he do something that they can present in court? That's all stuff that we kind of call circumstantial evidence and consciousness of guilt. But those are very, very important things. And I agree with you, Billy. Perhaps it should have been put out a lot sooner.
100% it should have went out there. Hang on a second.
Hey, police.
Yeah, there's somebody after me.
I'm sorry?
There's somebody after me.
Where are you?
There's somebody after me.
What's the matter? Are you okay?
What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do to me? Please stop.
Me, Mike. Brother,
No, stop it, please.
That is the voice of Shannon Gilbert calling 911 on May 1st of 2010. She was calling from the gated community of Oak Beach on Long Island in New York. Shannon was a prostitute who visited a client in that neighborhood. That call for help did not save her. Shannon disappeared. The initial search of the area Shannon was calling from did not reveal what happened to Shannon or where she was. But it did uncover something even more shocking: a series of bodies and a potential serial killer. And as more bodies were discovered, the search intensified, and finally, 18 months later, Shannon's body was found. Tonight, we take a listen to the 911 call made by Shannon, which took 12 years to release, and we try to uncover what happened to Shannon.
So one of the reasons I play that is because the case of Shannon Gilbert was ultimately what led the Suffolk County Police to find the 4 bodies known as the Gilgo 4. So these cases are interconnected, and whether they can ever put what some believe, the Suffolk County Police do not believe the Shannon Gilbert case was a murder, and many people are very upset about that. However, it definitely helped in the investigation in that it led to what is now known, of course, as the Gilgo 4: Maureen Brainyard-Barnes, Megan Waterman, Melissa Bartolome, and Amberlynn Costello. So when we talk about the interconnectivity of these cases, the Shannon Gilbert case was somewhat of a catalyst. Phil?
Absolutely, Billy. Without that case, perhaps these bodies may have still been in that marshy area. The police in Suffolk County don't believe that her disappearance has anything to do. It's not connected to Rex Human. Again, they don't believe that she was a victim of a homicide. They believe that she may have had some type of an intoxicant, was kind of freaking out, and wound up, running into those weeds and succumbing to the elements, perhaps, drowning in the marshy area. But with that, all of those things said, I do believe that this case is very powerful and very strong. When you take it apart and you look at all the different elements that there are, yes, Shannon Gilbert, it did have a lot to do with uncovering a lot of the details and perhaps some corruption with this case. But is it directly connected to Rex Human, and is she a victim of a homicide? I don't believe so.
Well, Phil, just to go get a little deeper in the science of that, the Suffolk County Office of the Chief Medical Examiner said that the cause of death was inconclusive. They couldn't determine what the cause was. She was found 18 months after she was dead, and so the family or Attorney John Ray brought in former New York City Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Michael Baden. And Dr. Michael Baden really agreed with the findings of the Suffolk County Medical Examiner, except he said that it looked like the hyoid bone was cracked. And that, as you know, is a sign of asphyxia, a potential asphyxia. So Dr. Michael Baden threw a whole hornet's nest into the mix, which he sort of ruled that, no, I agree with the Suffolk County Medical Examiner, but I'm disturbed by the hyoid bone being broken, and I think this could be death by asphyxia, therefore equals a homicide.
I think he was actually quite wrong in his ruling. I mean, you can't have it both ways, Billy. And he clearly said this, he said, I agree with the findings of the Suffolk County Medical Examiner that the cause of death to be undetermined. And then he says about the hyoid bone. Now, listen, of course, we're going to look at that. It's part of the forensic examination of the victim. Is it cracked? Yes, it is. Okay. But we also have the other components and elements. We have the driver, Mike, who was on that 911 call, who was very vigorously interviewed. We have the person whose home she was in. We have the other person whose door she knocked on. And they all described basically together the same. I mean, maybe detailed a little bit different, that a person who was frantic and ran off. And so I think with all of those things, that's how they came to conclusion. They didn't just use the Suffolk County Medical Examiner's examination of the body and determination to be undetermined the cause of death. They took everything else that they had into consideration, and they came up with that. And I clearly stated this in several episodes before. What reason would they have, would the Suffolk County prosecutor, Suffolk County Police Department, the FBI, the state police, everybody that's involved in this case, what reason would they have to eliminate this case from the serial killer case and all these other murders? There is no reason. This is what they firmly believe based on extensive interview and investigation.
Well, Phil, it sort of took a life of its own because of the alleged corruption with the Suffolk County Police. And that's why no one believes the findings. So that is understandable.
As host of the True Crime Podcast, The Sidebar, Joshua Ritter.
This should go kick in. I'm having problems with this Wi-Fi. I got it fixed and it's still...
you know, Billy, going back to Shannon Gilbert real quick. I mean, if you have all these other murders and the victims,
he's also a criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor. Yeah, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Mr. Ritter, I just want to jump right in there and follow up on some of the things that Laura mentioned in her report, including the belt with the initials. We can expect all of that to be contested by Mr. Heuermann's defense attorney. But Mr. Heuermann is expected to be charged later this morning in Maureen Brainard-Barnes' death. The fourth victim we've been hearing about. What kind of concrete evidence do you think authorities had in her case, if any, that caused such a delay in filing the murder charge?
It was the DNA evidence. One thing that we know about this investigation is that they've been incredibly thorough, but they've also been patient. And so it looks like that they wanted to wait until they had more conclusive testing done on the DNA evidence that linked Heuermann to this last victim here before they were willing to charge him. And I think that shows good judgment on their part, that they weren't just willing to go ahead and charge him if they didn't feel that they had a locked down case. So it's no surprise that this victim is being charged. The timing is a little bit of a surprise. But if you had been following the case and reading the affidavits attached, you knew that this was a victim that he was the prime suspect on.
And Joshua, now I've mentioned how you've also worked in the space as a criminal defense attorney. Authorities say they were able to confirm DNA evidence by plucking pizza crust out of Heuermann's trash can. However, that pizza crust deemed a bit controversial to some criminal experts. Will it be enough for the prosecution to get a conviction?
I think it will. I mean, listen, obviously the defense is going to attack it. They're going to attack the constitutionality of recovering that pizza crust. I don't think the prosecution is going to have much of a trouble with that argument because it was something that he discarded. Therefore, they don't need a search warrant in particular to recover that evidence. But they're also going to attack the collection of DNA evidence and the transporting of DNA evidence and the testing of DNA evidence. This whole case is really going to come down to that linchpin evidence of the DNA evidence. And the defense is going to do whatever they can to try to poke holes in that and cause some sort of doubt to arise in the jurors' minds.
And Joshua, last question I have for you. I have less than a minute, but I know you've covered this in your podcast. Tell our viewers why you think Heuermann will likely have 4 murder charges after today's major announcement. 11 bodies were found on Gilgo Beach. Why haven't authorities made any gains in those other cases?
I think they may be working on those other cases. I think they're, like I said, I think they're being patient. I think they're taking their time. I think they want to make sure that they don't charge him with something that's not going to stick, that may cause jurors to doubt the other counts. Right now, they have 4 strong counts. They're going to cross-corroborate each other when they actually argue this at trial. And so they want to make sure that they don't bring in another count that may be weak and cause some doubt to arise in the jurors' minds.
Joshua Ritter, host of his True Crime podcast.
So, Phil, good points raised here.
Very good.
Obviously, some of the things we already spoke about. And the one thing is that they got 4 solid cases. They got 4 indictments by a grand jury. The grand jury is still impaneled. And that's when we think about right here, the Gilgo 4. And name that, because they were all found within 25 to 30 feet, 50 feet of each other in that area of Gilgo Beach. They were all escorts, which fits Rex Heuermann's modus operandi. And the time frame, they were all discovered in 2010, even though Maureen Brainard-Barnes was missing since 2007. So when we think of how long this goes back and how long this evidence has been preserved, and we talk about the forensic evidence, the physical evidence, and the investigation being part science and part art of investigation, it's amazing that we're getting closer to the trial. We're getting closer to the possibility that Rex Heuermann's going to be held accountable. And this will be a fascinating trial with all the things that went on during this case over these 14 years that it's been going on.
Absolutely, Billy. And I think that Joshua there on that last video you played, he made a great point. The defense, and play a little bit of devil's advocate here, the defense is going to have to go after the collection, the testing, how this evidence was recovered. They're going to fight the fact that the pizza crust was taken out of the garbage. They're going to lose on that one. If they find a problem in the lab or whoever it was that did the examination, if they find a problem of how the actual hairs were collected, who had the, who vouched the evidence, how was it safeguarded all this time, that's where defense attorney is going to try and find a kink in the armor, so to speak, to to put that evidence out of the case. I don't think he's going to be successful based on what we see about this evidence. It does seem that it had been collected properly. It does seem that it had been tested properly. And when you hear about those numbers, that there's no such number, you put 48 zeros on the end of that number and it's trillions and trillions, or there's not even a name for the amount of the possibility of being someone else. There's only a certain number of people in the world. So I guess you can come to the conclusion that this DNA evidence is exact and it's super powerful.
This is Rex Heuermann's attorney, Michael Brown.
You folks, if I can.
For clarity,
we entered a not guilty plea this morning. He has maintained his innocence from day one. He entered a not guilty plea on the original indictment, and he again entered a not guilty plea this morning.
What is the reaction to that?
To the new charges? Well, we had advance notice that it was coming, so I explained that to him. Again, he said, I'm not guilty of these charges. He's looking forward to fight these charges, and we're doing that. We're going to continue to prepare. I expect that additional discovery will be forthcoming on the newest victim, and we're going to examine that and scrutinize it.
Any reaction to the hairs linked to his daughter and his wife?
We saw that this morning, and I know you're going to have a subsequent press conference upstairs. You folks have followed this case from the beginning, and all along we have been told that the evidence is unsuitable for nuclear DNA testing. This morning was the first time, and this is 13 plus years, that miraculously nuclear DNA testing and results have come forward. There has been testimony, there has been lab reports that consistently said it was incapable of having nuclear DNA testing. And we had mitochondrial DNA, and those statistics were quite frankly not very convincing. The initial mitochondrial DNA testing for what they claim was his wife was 28 out of 10,000. There was another hair that was 4 out of 10,000.
So he's discussing the DNA and the difference between mitochondrial and the new test that they did, which is nuclear DNA.
That doesn't put the wife as a suspect in terms of, or the actual donor of that DNA, but what it simply says is that she is not excluded. But if you take 28 people, and you'll find out of 10,000 people, 28 will have the same exact type of DNA.
But 8 trillion for the daughter.
This is what we just heard this morning. So we haven't seen anything on the newest indictment, but I am concerned because.
So Phil, a hell of a lot different than what Ray Tierney's saying. The take by Michael Brown, it's like he heard a whole different presentation of the evidence. And I think that what Ray Tierney presented is undoubtedly correct. It's coming right from the lab, the information he has in front of him. And from Michael Brown is, it doesn't make any sense to me.
It seems like he thought he was going to be able to attack the DNA evidence that was put forward in the early, after the first arrest, because it was mitochondrial DNA. It was going to be easier to attack. He thought he was going to be able to create doubt with that. Now you have the different type of DNA here. The examination was done in a lab, and I think he's going to have to try and either attack the lab or the collection of it. And it's going to be a much more difficult time for him to attack that type of evidence. So he has his work cut out for him. There's not only the DNA evidence in this case, Billy. We talked about a lot of different things, and obviously DNA of this nature is super powerful. It's him, and it's Asa Ellerubin. It's the daughter's hair because of the type of DNA that they got back now. But there is so many other things in this case. When you look at the telephone stuff, the computer stuff, the exchanges with the victims beforehand from burner cell phones, and they now recovered those burner cell phones. And the question that I was going to ask Dr. Debbie was, in her opinion, because I believe these murders took place in his home. Do you think the murders took place in his home? Because now we have the possibility that there was physical evidence from the victims recovered inside those homes. We also talked about trophies, and we talked about taking articles from the victims. Are any of those things going to be presented as evidence in the trial? So souvenirs and trophies, that's something that I think may be pertinent going on further in this case when it goes to trial. And I do believe that those murders took place inside his home. What's your opinion on that, Bill? Do you think it took place?
Phil, I think that, I don't know if all of them did. I think there's a possibility that a couple of them did. But when I listened to Dr. Joni, for some reason, as a serial killer profile, she did not think that he brought the victims to his home. And that also can be, we heard John Ray's press conference when he swore that Asa Ellerup, there's a picture of attorney John Ray.
I'm not going to base my opinion on what Johnny Ray said. What I'm basing my opinion on is this. We know that his family was out of the home. They were away during the times that we believe the murders took place. And I really believe a serial killer obviously wants control. He's not going to be able to control a situation in a vehicle if someone should pull up on him. He's not going to be able to control a situation somewhere out in public. He's going to be able to control the situation in the basement of his home. That's where I think these murders took place. And I'm sure we're going to get an indication of where the prosecution thinks these murders take place when this trial does happen. I just, I kind of feel that way based on what I know about serial killers from previous investigations on serial killers and the profiles. It would seem more than likely to me, and I'm not saying it's not possible that they did take place, let's say in his vehicle or somewhere else, but I think it's more likely that it took place in his home.
Phil, one of the things, and and I know, is that scientific evidence is the best evidence you can have.
Yes.
When we're getting, witness evidence, eyewitness identification, all of those things, they're icing on the cake. But the strongest evidence is always science. Science is the strongest evidence in a case like this. And when we heard today that not only do they have mitochondrial DNA, which we know is from a hair shaft and it's from the maternal side of the family, and that the mother and the daughter's mitochondrial DNA are basically identical. But then they also have 5 pieces of nuclear DNA, which is actually more accurate. And attorney Michael Brown was not happy about that.
You could see that in the press
yes,
conference.
very
His posture was
difficult.
much different than previous press conference.
Yeah, and I think it was almost like he made something up there saying, oh, it's only 28,
28 at 10,000. Those numbers don't sound right.
No, it sounded ridiculous. So I just really didn't get it. Chelsea B.
Think about what he said, Billy. He said that if you take 10,000 people, 28 out of that 10,000 are going to have the same profile. No way. That's bullshit.
No, I think that was ridiculous. Chelsea B. Science is amazing now. It absolutely is.
Sure is.
We see if you guys follow us on some of the other cases, the Koberger case in Idaho, the quadruple murder where Brian Koberger is sitting in jail awaiting trial. That is going to be a huge scientific case also, and we have something called touch DNA found on a knife sheath left in the crime scene. But yet there are many that think that's not very strong evidence. And, to me, how did it get there? Like, it's sort of ridiculous in my mind. But this DNA evidence that goes back 12, 13 years is so solid that the evidence was presented, and then tested when the science had matured to the point where they could do mitochondrial and nuclear DNA testing and have the DNA hairs come back to Asa Ellerup and to Victoria Uerman and Rex Uerman. Outstanding work. That is outstanding. And you could say what you want about the Suffolk County Police, but once this task force was formed and once they all got on the same page, things started to happen, Phil.
Absolutely, Billy. And when you look at DNA technology today, it's gone so advanced over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And it's like a fingerprint. You leave something behind like a fingerprint, like DNA. It can only be traced if you look at that nuclear to that one person. There's no question. And to me, I think that is just so powerful. Now, if you have just DNA, you look at all the other evidence, though, you have too. So you're going to take all the different components. We talk about circumstantial evidence all the time, Billy. This is not circumstantial. DNA is scientific evidence. To me, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. I am sure it'll be met the same way by the jurors. Then you have all the other different types of evidence that we talked about, the circumstantial stuff. And there's a lot of things that we don't know that haven't been revealed to the public. That's going to come out at trial. Let's hope and pray that there's more specific stuff that was found inside that home related to Rex Uerman that's also related to the victims in this case.
100%. We also talk about, the recent noise, I'll call it noise, where that's Asa Ellerup standing next to her attorney, Robert Macedonio, the Peacock documentary where she purportedly was offered $1 million to do a documentary on this case as it's happening. So there's some of the noise, of course, and we have John Ray with witnesses coming forth that are saying things happened that sort of can't be vetted at this point. So that sort of gets in the way. And there's also, that's Robert Macedonio forefront and another attorney named Vesmet Tev, who used to work with Johnny Ray. And now he works with Robert Macedonio. And Vesmet Tev is the attorney for the Uerman children, adult children. And Robert Macedonio is the attorney for Asa Ellerup. So a lot of distractions in this case. And there's, of course, the infamous Johnny Ray. And don't mean to disparage him. He kept this case alive. He kept it in the public eye when it seemed like people wanted to put it on the back burner. But just to keep that in mind, and of course, this is District Attorney Ray Tierney, who I'm sure is working tirelessly to bring this case forward with the grand jury still being active and the Gilgo Beach Task Force. And we'd be remiss if we didn't mention former Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison, who no doubt did an unbelievable job on this case. And I don't think this case would be where it is today if not for Rodney Harrison and the outstanding work that he brought to the case using New York NYPD style task force and putting this team together that bore these results. Phil, I'm going to give you your final thoughts, and we've been on for an hour and 25 minutes. It went fast, and folks, unfortunately, Dr. Debbie didn't have an appointment. Her internet went down, and I was trying to get her back onto the site, but
we'll have to have her back on again.
We'll definitely have her. I love Dr. Debbie. I think she's a
great,
fantastic guest, and all you guys seem to love Dr. Debbie. So I'll bring her back on as soon as I can. Phil, your final thoughts.
My final thoughts. I'm just so happy that today we did get charges against Rex Human for Maureen Brainard-Barnes. I'm going to mention the names again. You put it up a few times, but this is really what it's about. Melissa Bartholomew, Mega Waterman, Amber Costello, and Maureen Brainard-Barnes. That's why we're here. We're trying to get justice for these victims. Hopefully their families will find some comfort in this. There's no closure in a situation like this. I always say that. I don't think there's any such thing as closure when someone is murdered in this fashion. We're just going to hope and pray that we do get the justice that's deserved in this case. There's still other victims that were found out there. I believe 7 other victims. Hopefully the investigation continues and they can determine if Rex Human is responsible for those victims as well. And we're just going to stay tuned to this. This case is very interesting. If you like this type of a podcast, I think you can't get anything better than the way that we handle it. We do it from experience. We do it from our extensive work that we did in law enforcement. And we had a great, great guest today. She needs to be recognized. Dr. Debbie was great. I think if you look at the early part, even though she cut out at the end, some of the things she said were very, very insightful and informative. And I hope to have her back again real soon.
Absolutely. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in today. This case, of course, is not over. There is way more evidence that we haven't heard about. There's not even a trial date. I believe the next court appearance is February 6th. Rex Human will be back in court. So they'll be discussing all types of things, mostly procedural things. But we'll keep an eye on this case, and if there's anything new to report, we will be there. Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you soon. God bless.
Stay safe, everyone.
One episode just ain't enough.